Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today I have two friends here to help us learn and improve our front rack. So I have been here from WOD Prep, Eric Hinman. He's a sick endurance athlete, one of the best in the game at what he does. And on every single shoe review, I like to do some form of power clean or clean variation to test a shoe's overall stability when you're doing more power focused exercises. To follow up that content, folks often ask, how do you improve your front rack? How did your front rack get to where it's at? And so I wanted to have these two guys on the channel because they are freak athletes, but I also want them to help you learn how to improve your front rack. So I'm gonna have Ben take us through our first tip, Eric will take us through our second, and then we'll all kind of come together to give you a sweet third tip to implement into your training. All right, Ben, as somebody who has coached literally thousands of CrossFit athletes across all levels of expertise levels, I'm sure you've had to help somebody improve the front rack at least a time or two in your career.
A lot.
Could you take us through one of your favorite tips for improving your front rack?
Yeah, so I think one of the main issues that people run into when it comes to doing front racks, whether it's a power clean or a front squat or a front rack lunge or anything like that, is they don't understand what a front rack is. It's really easy, as I step up to the barbell here, it's really easy to assume that a front rack, like this is a front rack, right? Wrong. I don't know if you can see in the video, but basically what I'm doing right now is I'm holding it in what looks like a front rack position, but all of the weight is being supported on my wrist, my forearm. 0% of the weight is actually resting on my shoulders. This is why a lot of people run into a lot of wrist pain, and it just is an overall horribly frustrating position to be in, okay? So to fix this, Jake, what I like to do is I teach people how to actually support the weight on their shoulders. So what we need to do is by lifting my elbows and letting the barbell actually kind of rest against my neck, it's not gonna choke you, okay? You have muscles and bones that are in the way, it's not gonna actually choke you. But what it should feel like is it should feel like the entirety of the weight is resting on your shoulders. Yeah, your hands will be underneath of the bar for support, but really to know what a front rack is supposed to feel like, you should do what I call a Frankenstein rack, right? That's where we take our hands off, and then in theory, we should be able to do front squats, we should be able to do lunges, we should be able to do whatever we need to do in this front rack position with our hands off of it. This is how you know that you're actually supporting the weight on your shoulders rather than supporting the weight on your wrists.
And I really appreciate this tip because it really talks about like the skill component of the front rack, where it's not just us muscling everything through.
Right.
And so it's like, yeah, when you have a lot of wrist pain, a lot of different folks will have it just sitting in the wrist versus actually having it into a front rack. And now, do you have any cues? So let's say I've been holding it in my wrist. I want to create a better front rack position. Do you have any cues for helping people like understand, like drive elbows up? Should I roll it back into my wrist? Like, do you have any quick cues to use?
Sure. So number one is like, don't be afraid of the barbell choking you. It's not actually going to choke you. I mean, heck, some people might even be into that, but not me.
Not that type of channel here, buddy. Or is it?
Or is it? So I let that bar roll back into my neck a little bit, and it kind of sits on the crease of my shoulders. You asked a little bit about like, what do I want to do with my elbows? So I'm always telling people, imagine laser beams are shooting out of your elbows, okay? So imagine a laser shooting out of my elbows. You don't want to shoot yourselves in the foot, okay? So if your elbows are dropping like this, not only are you going to have a lot of pressure on your wrist, and that's going to cause a lot of that wrist pain that so many people feel, it also could potentially run into my legs when I'm doing a front squat. That's going to cause a lot more pain. And when my elbows are down, I know for a fact that the barbell is not resting on my shoulders. So a cue that I will tell athletes when they're learning how to front squat is lasers up or lasers forward or shoot the person in front of you, or whatever violent cue that I like to give. And what it turns into is something like this, right? So rather than squatting and allowing those elbows to drop, I say elbows up or lasers forward. And I'm trying to keep those elbows up the entire time to make sure that one, I'm not shooting myself in the foot with the laser beams, and two, it actually keeps that barbell in that position where it's actually resting on my shoulders.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. I love that tip.
Sweet. Don't shoot yourself in the foot.
All right, so Ben took us through a skill-focused tip for improving our front rack, but you were mentioning earlier that you actually struggled with wrist mobility out of the gate when you were getting into CrossFit. Yep. And so I would love for you to talk on maybe a tip of how you improved your wrist tenacity and mobility to get a better front rack, because I think there are some folks who just might not have the ability to just cue themselves to get in that nice position. So what did you do to kind of improve what your wrist could handle and do under the bar?
Yeah, so I came from an Ironman background. I didn't have any Olympic lifting. I got into CrossFit about 8 or 10 years ago. And my wrists bothered me for the first 6 months of CrossFit from all of the front rack position and gymnastics and handstand push-ups. And yeah, during that time period, I was just doing a lot of like time under tension stuff and wrist stretches. So, holding a plank, holding a handstand against the wall, short duration things just to build, the smaller tendons and ligaments that were bothering me in my wrist to support, the strength that I had in my shoulders and elsewhere. So a lot of it too was just like practicing the movement. So, pause squats, developing more and more mobility, just practicing the position. It's kind of like running. Like, I don't have any formal training in running. The more I ran, the better I became at it because it was just sets and reps. And with this, it's just really time under tension, not doing something that's gonna, tremendously bother your wrists all the time, but, short segments, doing a plank, maybe doing some drills like this where, your palms are facing out to really get a good stretch. But again, not doing it for like minutes at a time. You don't want to continue to strain it. You want to do it just enough so that, with each time, maybe 3 or 4 times a week, short intervals of doing that, so you start to gain that mobility so they don't bother you when you're doing the handstand movements or doing front rack type movements.
I love that. So it's like a nice graded exposure to different ranges. And then also, like, to Eric's point, if you do struggle with mobility, doing some wrist work before your physical workout can be an awesome tool because you're now putting yourself into this increased range of motion with some exposure to the stressors you're going to want to be under, but then you're physically practicing that and implementing it while training. And that's a big thing with mobility, where it's like, if you want to access these greater ranges, it's working into them, but then slowly loading them and accumulating that nice stress to teach the body, hey, I'm in a safe spot, I can handle this, yada, yada. So I love that because I think a lot of folks too just don't naturally have this mobility if they didn't play like a certain sport or whatever else growing up. So I really appreciate that tip. That's fantastic. And then our third tip, which is something that we all kind of agreed on with improving your front rack, is just practicing it more. There's such a skill component to most exercises that often gets overlooked. And so just programming more front rack exercises can be a fantastic and underutilized tool in the context of improving your front rack. I think a lot of people get in their heads of like, I need all these flashy drills and exercises, but it's like, really though, are you practicing it enough? Are you giving yourself a nice graded exposure to where you're not beating your wrists up a ton? So that being said, if I was on a weekly basis trying to improve my front rack, do you have any tips for programming that somebody could implement?
Definitely. So for me, pause squats worked very well, specifically pause front squats. So, I was pausing in the hole, and maybe it starts, just with your fingers on the bar, but pausing in that bottom position to gain that mobility. And then over time, you're going to be able to develop the mobility where you can hold it with all of your fingers in that squatting position. So you don't need a lot of weight on the bar, enough just to put the pressure on your wrists. But the pause squats, time under tension, they worked incredibly well for me to develop that front rack mobility.
Awesome. And then also another couple things that come to mind too are just doing even more front rack holds. So like after a front squat session, doing holds just for like a little bit of time each time, trying to add a little bit more. And then on top of like the pause work, you could even just program front squats or cleans a little bit more often than you are now. So like for a cycle, maybe swapping out back squats or front squats, like do you think that would be a viable option?
Definitely. I mean, I typically back squat and front squat on the same day. I think they're super valuable movements. And yeah, I agree. A lot of people avoid front squats specifically because of that front rack position. So the more you practice it, the more comfortable you'll get with front squats. And I think front squats are an incredible tool to build quad strength and hamstring strength.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the tips. All right, guys, thank you so much for the help on the front rack tips video. This is a video that I wanted to have friends also contribute to because I think having multiple coaches share thoughts and athletes share thoughts is super useful. But this has been from WOD Prep. Once again, Eric Hinman. All of their info will be dropped down in the description below, so definitely check them out. He's a sick coach and athlete. He's a sick coach and athlete. Like, they're just good, salt of the earth dudes. But I will see you guys in the next one. As always, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I will see you in the next one. I just said that twice. All right, boys, you gotta come down. You gotta come down. That's way heavier. That's way heavier. That's way heavier than I thought it was gonna be.
I was dying, man.
That's way heavier than I thought it'd be, boys. This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and in every all right, ready?
Yep. This is gonna be a long video.
Fuck off.